Depending on where you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today for this Ribbon Communications webinar. I am John Ryan, Marketing Communications Specialist for Ribbon, and in just a minute, Microsoft Senior Product Manager Nikolai Muravlianikov and Ribbon Strategic Alliances Director Brad Chapin will discuss the latest on Microsoft Teams, Microsoft's roadmap for Teams, best practices, as well as the roadmap for the Ribbon SBC portfolio and how the portfolio integrates with Microsoft Office 365 to deliver voice services to customers, enabling a modern hub for teamwork. We also have with us Ribbon Solutions Marketing Director Dwight Morse, who will monitor the questions that we receive from our attendees. Please feel free to type in and submit a question at any time during this webinar. We will also have a webinar recording available within 24 hours from the completion of this live webinar. And with that, we will now send things over to Brad Chapin, who will get this webinar started.
Thank you, John, and thank you, everybody, for joining today. So on this webinar, we're going to talk a lot about Microsoft just on the heels of Enterprise Connect. This is the one-year anniversary of Teams, and there's a lot that has come out in the last year and a lot that still is yet to come. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what Microsoft Teams is, how you get Microsoft Teams, how Teams differs or varies from Skype for Business if you have it deployed today either on-premise or in the cloud. We're going to go a little bit into kind of the roadmap of Teams, of what's coming on Teams, and kind of some timelines associated with that. And then we're going to drill down a little bit into the architecture, or rather Nikolai will be, and he'll talk about the call flows and the new functionality that was announced last week at Enterprise Connect, which is known as direct routing. Go into a few best practices, then wrap it up with kind of the roadmap on how the Ribbon SBC portfolio plays into Microsoft Teams and direct routing, and then we'll wrap it up. So with that, let's first introduce Microsoft Teams. So for some of you who maybe aren't familiar with Microsoft Teams, Teams came out, I'd say probably about a year ago. It's had some rapid enhancements over the last year, and essentially it differs because it's very much a persistent chat with I'd say a channel-like philosophy. So it's designed for how people work today. So Skype for Business, great for IM, great for presence, and really good for one-on-one, but not as good for how people collaborate today. And so Teams kind of went to fill that void and kind of brought that together. And really it's about leveraging all of your collateral, whether those are Excel documents or PowerPoints or Word docs, having them securely available to those in your work group, and being able to have all the security that Office 365 provides to you, and really have an easy, intuitive interface to be able to get access and share and update and work with others on those hubs. It's customizable for every team, so that way you can have different rights, different attributes. You can have internal, external people, and because it's all built on Office 365, it is based on kind of all of those benefits that you get with Office 365, and of course all those benefits can vary based on, of course, the Office 365 package that you have, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we kind of continue on. So in the first year of Teams, you can kind of see some of the stats here of just the rapid growth and succession, and these are kind of some screenshots of what the Teams interface looks like. And you can kind of have it on different devices, whether that's a tablet, a PC, a mobile device, and it's optimized for every different type of environment that you have. This last slide here, before we continue on, shows the calling plan or the calling features that you can have within Teams as well. So I'd say, probably about 2 months ago, they added the Microsoft calling plan to Teams, which means that you could now leverage voice calling within Teams in select countries and in one particular way. And so from that perspective, we'll go into more detail kind of on what calling plans are and how they vary. But just last week at Enterprise Connect, it won Best of Show. So if you haven't deployed a collaboration environment for your, for your work groups and for your teams within your enterprise, realize that really, Teams is a great offer. As I said, one best in show, and so from that perspective, it is really, I'd say, leading the collaboration space in providing enhanced, rich functionality. And we're going to come up here on our first poll question today. And just to kind of set this up, the question is, are you using a collaboration platform today? And so that could be Teams, because of course, Teams has been around for, as I said, about a year now. Some people, talk about Skype for Business as being a collaboration platform. Some people have used Slack, or you might have another one, or maybe you're just new to collaboration and looking for your first thing. So with that, feel free to kind of click on the radio button and submit whichever one is most applicable to you. We'll give it a few seconds here since there are quite a few of you on the call today. So that way we can kind of get a accurate amount. It's still coming in, so let me wait a few more seconds here. All right. Oh, starting to taper off a little bit. Actually, the numbers keep rising. So let me give it a few more seconds. Looks like a few of you maybe stepped away and grabbed some coffee while you were on this. All right, I'll skip to the results now. All right. So in terms of what you're using for collaboration today, it looks like more than 50% of you are using Skype for Business today. Another 25% are using Teams. Some are using some other things, so it'd be interesting to know kind of what some of those other collaboration platforms that you might be using. A few using Slack and some not using anything at all. So let's just skip to the next slide. If you are considering it, or maybe you haven't yet deployed it, obviously in this last poll question, it looked like a lot of you are using Microsoft technology. It looked like over 75%. So we'll jump to this next poll question and just kind of see if you're doing anything with collaboration, who you might be using today. It looks like I'm figuring out where that other is now fitting in. All right, let's just jump to the results here. And so it looks like predominantly on this call, you either are or have already deployed with Microsoft. Looks like some of that other was either Cisco Spark or BroadSoft for the most part, but still some others as well. So interesting. Maybe we'll find out as we go through some of these poll questions later on to get a little bit more information on some of what you're doing. So, one of the things that we want to talk about is how Microsoft Teams is different than Skype for Business Online, not only from a pricing, but talk a little bit about some of the terminology and kind of a high-level architecture as well. So if you're familiar with some of Microsoft's enterprise plans, and this is straight off their website, you can kind of see here at the bottom of the slide, if you're in an E1, an E3, or an E5 license plan, and you can kind of see the MSRP pricing on that, all of those plans include Teams today. So if you want to start a pilot today, it's just as easy really as downloading the software and installing it and running Teams today and kind of seeing if it's going to take off within your environment. To be honest, here at Ribbon, that's actually what we did. We're using, of course, enterprise licensing with Microsoft and are using significantly, I'd say the whole company is running on Skype for Business. I'm talking, out of one of our offices today on Skype for Business into this bridge, and we're all using Teams and started very early on to kind of use it for our collaboration platform because it was included. And so, as I said, it's included in kind of all of these different environments. Obviously, what you get in terms of Teams partly depends on which plan you have. So if you kind of see that highlighted thing and voice capabilities in that E5 license at the top, when we talk today about direct routing and being able to receive calls into your Teams client, inbound, outbound, out of the PSTN, that's kind of what we mean when we're talking about and voice capabilities. There's some point-to-point capabilities and some point-to-point audio and video just in kind of the lower tiers, but and of course you can always add on to some of the lower tiers as well if you want, and we'll talk a little bit about that pricing as we kind of go through this slide deck. So there was some terminology that was announced at Microsoft Ignite last year. I think that's around the September timeframe, and then of course last week at Enterprise Connect there was some new ones as well, and there was also some stuff in between. So we kind of want to highlight some of the different terminologies that Microsoft uses, because as we start talking through a lot of this slide deck, we want to make sure that when we're throwing out names, and I've already thrown out some already, that we're all kind of on the same page. So initially when Microsoft came out with Skype for Business Online, they called it Cloud PBX. And last year they rebranded that to Phone System. As I mentioned earlier, Phone System is included with the E5, so those voice capabilities are included with the E5. You can also add it on to the lower SKUs like E1 and E3. Also, in between Ignite and Enterprise Connect, they added what's known as a common area phone, or a CAP license. And so if you saw on the previous slide all the great features of Word, Office, Excel bundled into your monthly price, so that way you always had the most up-to-date, or things like Power BI or eDiscovery, things like that typically aren't needed for lobby phones. And so a lot of people had phones that were in the lobby and didn't want to really pay for, of course, all these other things that a lobby phone really didn't need. And so Microsoft filled that void by introducing another SKU just for telephony functionality, so that way people didn't need to have the whole enterprise bundle. Also, before Enterprise Connect, they had something that they called PSTN conferencing, and that was also included in the E5 as an add-on in the E1, E3. They renamed that to audio conferencing, because really it was about audio conferencing, and a lot of people maybe didn't know what PSTN was, and so they just simplified it by changing it to audio. Also, same thing on PSTN calling. Everybody who has a mobile phone knows that you call up your mobile phone provider, whether that's AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile or whoever it happens to be, and you get a calling plan. So they renamed that to calling plan as well. And they also introduced some different price points as well, depending on whether you're domestic or international. And at Enterprise Connect last week, they also, I believe, added one more. It's not an unlimited or quote unquote unlimited plan. It's a reduced set of minutes, but I think that one is coming in at maybe $8 a month. I haven't necessarily had time since the show ended last week to dive into more details on that. But one of the biggest things at Enterprise Connect that was announced was direct routing. And essentially, direct routing was announced, and essentially what that means is we talked on previous webinars after Ignite about what was called an optimized SBC, and so an optimized SBC was kind of the same, I would say, definition, which is that there would be certain vendors that would certify their SBCs with Microsoft. They would potentially add new functionality, new enhancements, and drive, I'd say, future capabilities with Microsoft in terms of Teams. Microsoft has kind of made it official. Those partners, Ribbon being one of them that was announced last week, are working on certifying their SBCs with Microsoft, and this will be happening over the next couple of months in anticipation of direct routing being generally available at the end, by the end of Q2 of this year. There will also, of course, be other supported SBCs. So there will be some, vendors out there that, just due to market share or due to the fact that, they're out there and customers have them and want to use them, that they'll have supported SBCs. But the optimized SBC, in addition to, of course, doing the direct routing and have additional functionality will have much greater and tighter NOC integration with Microsoft. So that way, if you do run into an issue, those issues can be dealt with rather quickly. Cloud voice is just kind of a general term that's used just to talk about telephony services that come in the cloud. So sometimes Microsoft talks about cloud voice, and that could be Skype for Business Online. That could be Teams with either a calling plan or with direct routing. And then two other terms that are exclusively used really with Skype for Business is OPCH, which is on-premise call handling, and essentially that means taking your Skype for Business server, configuring it in a way that it can work in conjunction with Skype for Business Online, and then CCE. And there's, again, Microsoft is working with two partners, Ribbon being one of them, where Ribbon has a certified, or an appliance that's certified and has CCE running and tested and validated by Microsoft to ensure that customers who want to go to Skype for Business Online have a way to bring their local trunks up to Skype for Business Online. That's done with CCE. And on these next slides, we'll kind of go into a little bit more detail on that. So in terms of kind of how it works, Office 365 has what we call phone system, and phone system can kind of drive out and be delivered through the Teams interface. And all of that, as you can kind of see, is within the Office 365 environment. And then for kind of your dial tone or your ability to make inbound and outbound call, as I said, Microsoft has their calling plans. They have prices associated with that. Depending on what your enterprise license is, there is some different pricing. You can always jump back and check on that as well. And then customers can also connect using their own trunks. So those could be analog trunks, BRI trunks, depending on where you are in the world, PRI, T1, E1, as well as SIP trunking. And however they bring those trunks in, bringing those trunks in and routing them directly to the phone system in Office 365 is what we call that direct routing. And so if you look at direct routing in a little bit more detail, and this is kind of just showing that if you have a PSTN provider, and that PSTN provider, as I was mentioning, can either be delivering it over SIP or TDM, that delivers it up to the SBC, and then the SBC can also bring in other different things. So for the SBC, as many of you know, does a variety of different things. One thing, of course, is to provide security, but the other thing is to potentially do interop. So if you have a contact center solution, you're keeping that contact center solution, you might want to route those calls differently because you're not necessarily going to route those calls into Teams. Teams is kind of more for that knowledge worker, that collaborative worker, not necessarily for contact center agents who are logging in and out and doing wrap-up codes and things of that nature. And then if you have things like analog devices that you want to bring into the cloud, it's a great way to use an SBC that supports analog devices to do that as well. So those are kind of all the different ways. And then, of course, if the SBC supports things like Active Directory routing, rather than having to peel off a group of users based on a DID range, you can really just do an Active Directory dip that can be cached on the SBC, and then you can route based on what they are flagged in Active Directory. If they're activated for Teams, you can route it up to Office 365 into the phone system so for their call to be terminated on Teams. We'll talk about the specific call flows and kind of where the media goes and where the signaling goes as we switch it over to Nikolai in a few more slides. And so if you're talking about going from Skype for Business Online to Teams and you have CCE today, this is kind of what it looked like prior to Ignite. Of course, that red box that says Cloud PBX was changed to Skype for Business Online, and it's basically as a part of Teams, and that phone system is kind of that umbrella term. And now with Teams kind of being as a portion of phone system, really you're not using CCE to connect to Skype for Business Online. You're using the optimized SBC, potentially with or without that CCE already embedded into it, to connect to Teams. If you haven't purchased an SBC from Ribbon and you are planning on it and you're going to go directly to Teams, the optimized SBC just by itself can do that direct routing. You don't necessarily need to buy one with a CCE. So in the future, say down the road, if Skype for Business Online, was migrated over towards Teams, purely done with an optimized SBC. Of course, if you bought an SBC with CCE in it, of course it has a Windows operating system, and you can leverage that hardware for a variety of other purposes. And when we talked about Skype for Business Online, we typically talked about 3 different flavors: the on-premise, the hybrid, and the cloud. Of course, on-premise, there's going to be a Skype for Business 2019 that'll come out a little bit later this year. But when we talked about Skype for Business Online, we always talked about hybrid and cloud. And Teams fits in those exact same 2 boxes. There's not going to be a Teams on-premise because Teams is built on Office 365. It uses Azure microservices, and it's built within the cloud, and so that collaboration really happens there. And of course, you can be all cloud, and that's with, say, Microsoft Calling Plan, things of that nature. If you want to go hybrid, that's when we're talking about, essentially this direct routing. And we are now moving on to kind of the next poll question. So maybe a lot of you are using Skype for Business today. It might be on-prem. Some of you might be using Teams. You might be using Teams for collaboration, but you might not necessarily have gone to using voice in the cloud. So just, real quick poll question, yes or no, kind of more or less. Are you considering or have you deployed cloud voice already? All right, I'll jump to the results as a few of you finish up putting yours in. But in terms of whether you're considering it or potentially using it, the bulk, over 70%, is today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nikolai, who's going to talk a little bit about the roadmap in terms of, what Skype for Business Online is, what Teams is. There are some features that are available with Skype for Business Online today that aren't quite there at Teams. He's going to talk a little bit more about the roadmap on exactly when you can expect to see those features, and then we're going to talk about, how that call routing or that direct routing works.
Thank you, Brad. So this slide is not a secret. It's what Microsoft has published in after midnight. So it's actually October last year. So we published a public roadmap, and it's available to everyone, aka.ms/Skype and Teams, and you can find these slides. And we promised, including the quarters, when particular features will be delivered. And in January, we just updated the roadmap, and it wasn't updating in terms of, hey, here are new features, so here are the features which not will be delivered. We just updated on the progress, and we didn't skip any features. So, and our roadmap actually is consists from different areas. So this one is calling roadmap. You can see what is available today, right? So if you look at the slide, the most requested features like transfers, call blocking, speed dial, final ring, extension dialing, hold, etc., it's all available already. And coming in the second quarter, you can see we are working on group call escalations, both dedicated admins, call queues, consultative transfer. We just actually checked in the production, organizational auto-attendant, D&D, distinctive ringing, and one of the feature which is here, the name is Hybrid Connection to Teams. It is what we announced as direct routing. And on our roadmap, there are also some other features which are coming later in fourth quarter of 2018. So in terms of other functionality, so we are working on interops scenarios, call support between Teams and Skype Consumer. The support of existing certified C phones, so you might have the phones which you bought for Skype for Business and want to reuse with Teams. And we also work in some e-discovery enhancements, mostly for enterprise scenarios. In terms of meetings, again, I will not go through the each and every item here. They are self-explanatory unless you have some questions, and you can always download this slide. So we, in terms of what we delivered, you can see that most of enterprise scenarios already there, including like lobby support, which has been asked for maybe for a long time since we started Teams, audio conferencing we just added recently. We do support schedule and Outlook, desktop sharing, application sharing. We support different platforms like Windows, Mac, Edge, Chrome, whatever for the meetings. We do support policies, right, for providing the user-level access to the meetings. And what is coming is broadcast, cloud recording is what you might saw on the Enterprise Connected rated meetings are coming, large meeting support, PSTN fallback. So we also received a lot of feedback that PowerPoint should be loaded as a separate application or program is what we have in Skype for Business. We're now delivering Teams, whiteboarding, and some additional scenarios in meetings. So again, I will not go through each and every item here. So if you have any questions, just ask us, or you can always ask Dwight, just paste the link onto the public roadmap. You can always check this roadmap, and if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us. Let's switch to the little bit architectural deep dive and understand how direct routing works. And in order for me to demonstrate how direct routing works, so let's talk about overall architecture first without even PSTN, without PSTN call. So there are several Teams users and the basics. Let's talk about the basics. So the Teams user wants to talk to another Teams user. So we have microservices in Azure, and Teams user actually reach into call controller, signaling the intention to communicate to another Teams user. Signaling goes via HTTPS. The call controller understands where another user is and signals the intention to another user. The media will flow directly between the two Teams users. The media will not flow via the cloud if such path can be established. If there is no firewall between the users, which might prevent this call flow. This is nothing new comparing to the Skype for Business. For those who are familiar with Skype for Business, we use the same logic. If there is no connectivity, so for example, network address translation device sits in between the two Teams users, one Teams user, let's say on internet, one on internal network, the media in this case will flow via relay. Relay is deployed in our cloud. Now let's think about the scenario where two Teams users talk to each other and there is a media established between those Teams users, and now the Teams user wants to escalate this call to a multi-party call. And again, we are not talking about PSTN yet, we are just talking about the basics of call flow in Teams, and we will review the PSTN in very shortly. So the Teams user actually signals the intention to escalate this call which is going on to a conference call. The call controller on our side actually picks the media processor. The media processor is something that you might think as MCU in Skype for Business on premises online, right? So we need to switch the audio from one to one. We need to switch to MCU, a device which will mix the audio and send to participants. So call controller actually goes and picks the MCU and signals the MCU to all three participants. The audio will start going through the media processor. It will be mixed and sent to each and every participant. This is very similar to what we have in Skype for Business, except the services itself are new services and are rewritten in Azure. Now, we understand the basics of call flow scenarios. So Just let me summarize them. One-to-one call, we always prefer direct path. If direct path is not available, let's say one user is behind map, the other users are on the internet, then we will switch to traversing the media via relays. If it's a conferencing, in the conferencing we need a multi-point control unit, some device which will mix the audio, then we will switch the audio to flow through the Microsoft Cloud, mix the audio and send to participants. Now, in this picture, we want to add session border controller and configure direct routing for inbound and outbound call. So there are additional components which we have in our cloud. So there is a PSTN hub which actually handles all signaling in our cloud, and SIP proxy. As you might notice on the previous slide, and I mentioned this, the Teams uses HTTP REST for signaling. And Ribbon SBC uses SIP for signaling. So we also have a SIP proxy which actually can translate from the HTTP REST to the SIP. When call is established, and we also have some database which has voice routes, voice policy, SBC trunk configuration, call detail records, monitoring, troubleshooting. If I'm talking about voice routes, it's voice routes the same way we have them on-premise. Now the Teams user wants to make an outbound call, so Teams user signals its intention to call controller, actually using HTTP REST call controller, consult with our database where are the voice routing, what are the voice policies for this user, can this user make a call or it's prohibited by voice policies or voice routes, and if user is eligible to make this call, then the call controller will send the signal into PSTN hub. PSTN hub is something that controls all SBCs, but it acts and interacts with other components using HTTP REST. The PSTN hub actually looks at the targets, right? So because the user might have several SBC in the route. Let's say when the user makes a call to number +1 42597452227, for this particular user, use SBC1, SBC2 as active, and SBC3 as passive, right? And all SBC pairs to our cloud. So call controller actually sends 3 targets in this scenario: SBC1, SBC2 as active, and SBC3 as passive. So PSTN hub actually figures out that looks at the health of each and every SBC, provided SBC. So let's say SBC1 and SBC2 are both active and there is no health issues, then we will pick at random. If there are some issues with one of the active SBC, we will deprioritize it in the routing. Let's say SBC2 didn't reply an option for a long time. PSTN hub also consults with the media processor, and we are talking with call without media bypass, right? With media processor, which is MCU, so media should go via our cloud, just to assign the media processor, and then sends all this information to SIP proxy to form a classic, I would say, SIP invite with SDP, session description protocol of media processor, and in the other leg we will send this to Teams user. And SIP proxy actually starts signaling invite, now using SIP signaling to Ribbon SBC. The media will flow from the Teams client to media processor and to the Ribbon SBC. So Teams user never talks directly in terms of signaling to the Ribbon SBC, or all interaction goes via our cloud. And after the call, all information from each and every component, let's say quality of experience information, sent to our database from Teams client, from SIP proxy, from call controller, PSTN hub, from media processor actually as well. And we show this data in call detail records and call analytics. If there is a media bypass, so we're also working on the media bypass scenario, then Teams client actually sends an intention to make an outbound call to call controller. Again, PSTN hub receives the targets, let's say SBC1, SBC2, and SBC3, and both SBC1 and SBC2 have a flag media bypass enabled. Then we will not assign the media processor. However, what we will do, we will ask media processor just to create a SDP with the direct candidate of Ribbon SBC. The direct candidate will be public IP of Ribbon SBC, and whatever media address Ribbon SBC provided to us. And we will start send invite to the ribbon, and we also will send back to Teams user the message with media candidates directly on the ribbon SBC, right? So public IP and port which was picked up for this call. Let's say for some reason with media bypass, you prevented the clients to connect directly to public IP of ribbon SBC. So if you're internal network, it shouldn't be the issue. But let's say you are in your user is on some kind of Starbucks, right, and cannot reach out to the ribbon SBC because IT Pro set access control list on ribbon, and they only allow the media traffic from well-known entities, let's say C proxy in this case, media processor, and relay. So you folks don't want to open the ribbon SBC to the whole internet, only for well-known components because of security. So in this case, we will still try to connect directly because ribbon SBC provided us the direct IP. The client will try to connect directly. The connection will fail because it's closed. And then the media will be established via relay, and the relay is open to the ribbon SBC. So client will use relay in our cloud. So, and I see there is a lot of questions. I will reply them after I will review. Now, so this is the high-level overview how the call flow works. We will be publishing much more information before the general availability, but this is what we are working and testing now. In terms of global view, right, so there are some components you see: call control, PSTN hub, C proxy, media processor. We actually have 3 worldwide deployments in the United States, Asia, and Europe. When you have, and what we do, we also define them, or we assign the data center based on the public IP of the session border controller. In this case, for example, one of the session border controllers is in Seattle and it has the United States public IP. We always will assign C proxy media processor from the United States data center. What is important to mention when I talk about data center, that doesn't mean there is only one, right? There might, in the US, we have several data centers which host media processor, C proxy, so we will be assigning first from the US and the second closer in the US. If it's, again, if it's an SBC which is deployed in Estonia, in this case, then we will assign the European data center, and the same applies for Asia Pacific. If it's SBC in Australia, then based on the public IP of the session border controller, we will assign the closest data center. With that, it's just overview of the functionality, and let me answer a couple questions. Chris said, sorry, I cannot understand the current presenter. Sorry, so Chris, what is not clear? Call controller, can you slow? Yeah, sorry, I will be slowing down. So there is a question for Teams, there will be a different client or will be the same Skype for Business client. We are talking about the scenario where you can use direct routing only with Teams client, not with Skype for Business client. Okay, so it's actually, there is a complaint about audio quality. Sorry, we probably will have more sessions recorded with better audio quality. So with that, let me switch to the next poll. So there is a question, do you plan deploying Teams with direct routing? And I will just open the poll. Okay, a little bit more. I will skip the result. Thank you. Okay, good. So let me a little bit slow down and go and try to speak more clearly. So requirements. In terms of requirements, what Microsoft provides. Microsoft provides a phone system in the cloud, which is part of the E5, or can be acquired as add-on to E3 and Teams client. What customer needs to provide the supported optimized session border controller, in this case we are talking about Ribbon, the access to this SBC from Office 365, because we need the signal from call controller, from media processor, the public IP for session border controller. We cannot, of course, connect to the private IP from the cloud. You also need to have a PDN for session border controller, certificate, and telephony funds. So once you have this, you will just run a pairing and pair your session border controller, configure voice routing. A lot of configuration, for example, voice routing, is very similar to what you experience in Skype business on premises. And we will be providing the detailed technical trainings and demos next quarter. So we have one more tool. If you plan, and I saw a lot of you actually replied that you want to, plan to configure Teams with direct routing. But now the question, do you plan to deploy Teams at all, right? With direct routing, with calling plans, with whatever, and what is your timeline? And this is not related to voice functionality. It might be with voice, it might be without voice. Okay, let's give a couple more minutes. I will skip the result. Okay, thank you. With this, let me transition to Brett. Brett? For the next slide.
All right, great. Thanks, Nikolai. So, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, Microsoft as well as Ribbon both announced support for Ribbon with direct routing at Enterprise Connect last week. This is going to be supported across the entire SBC portfolio. I have been seeing questions come in, and I've been answering along the way of, well, what does it mean, on, what you're going to support. So in terms of, and a lot of times we break it out from what we deem edge, core, portfolio. So in terms of our SBC 1000, which a lot of times we refer to as our edge SBC portfolio, these products today are Microsoft certified in terms of Skype for Business, and that would be Skype for Business on-prem or online in conjunction with the CCE. These devices have gone through rigorous testing. And of course, both of these platforms will also be Teams supported when we finish through the testing. The testing is not quite underway, but we do have customers that are using this in, I would say, a beta environment today, and they're using this in conjunction with Teams direct routing. In addition to, of course, what we typically define as our Edge SBC portfolio, we also talk about what we call our core SBC portfolio. So that's our SBC 5000. So it could be a 5110, 5210, or say a 5400, which is what a lot of our customers are buying today. And again, also the SBC 7000, which you typically don't see in a lot of enterprise environments. Those are typically seen amongst larger carriers. But again, both of those products will be certified as well. And then we also have virtual editions. So by the end of Q2, we also expect to have our SBC SWE certified, and then following on afterwards, we will also add support for our SBC SWE Lite. So all of these products plan to be certified, and so whether you start today with a trial with Teams in conjunction with direct routing on a 1K, a 2K, a 5K, a 7K, or one of our virtual platforms, all of these products plan to be supported in, I'd say, the future. Again, there are no certified SBCs for direct routing today, but all of these will undergo testing, and we do plan on having these ready for customers to be able to start leveraging them. Some of these will be based on current firmware that exists for the product today. On some of the platforms, we are adding new enhancements, as I was kind of talking earlier about an optimized SBC. Some of our SBCs require some additional functionality to be added. Doesn't require any hardware change out. All this can be done with software, and that will be added just as a firmware update. So if you're under maintenance, you can get access to that software update. Again, no hardware change out, no hardware add-ons. The portfolio as it exists today will be able to be leveraged with direct routing. And just did want to have a few last poll questions before we kind of wrap this up. And so one of the questions I want to know is, some of the people probably came to this webinar today to learn a little bit more about Teams. Some of it maybe we're thinking about doing calling plans. Some of it, some of the people that maybe joined today, wasn't aware when SBC provided that the SBC could be used to do interrupt for their existing legacy infrastructure, whether that is an on-premise, VIA or Cisco, things of that nature, or maybe they have analog devices, or they want to bring in local trunking. Maybe they didn't know that that was an option. So question is, are you using an SBC today? Curious if this webinar is mainly our own customers, or if there's other customers, potentially of other vendors out there that are learning a little bit more today. Give it a second or two for this poll to kind of get some numbers in. Okay, I'll just skip to the results here. So it looks like, I would say, over half of you, probably because you were invited to this by us, do have a ribbon SBC, and that could be branded as a Sonus SBC or a GenBand SBC. But yes, you're using SBCs today. It looks like some of you out there are using Cube, and of course, about 25% of you are using an SBC, but using somebody else. And there's a few of you on that don't plan on using an SBC, so either you don't have an SBC, or maybe you're not planning on using an SBC, so you might just plan on using a calling plan from Microsoft. And so that kind of is what we're going to finalize on, is if you didn't have an SBC, or if you do have an SBC, the question could be, are you planning on maybe doing a calling plan from Microsoft? You don't maybe want your own SBC, or maybe you have an SBC and it could be a different one, so maybe you're waiting for something else other than the direct routing option. So I'm just curious what people are looking to do, from whether they want to keep that media local and maybe not deal with an MPLS circuit, or running that voice over the internet, and so maybe they want to keep that media local and they want to do direct routing. So let's see what this poll question looks like. Okay, I'll skip to the results as we get a few more in, but it looks like, I would say, the vast majority, over 65%, plan on doing direct routing, probably one of the reasons why you're on today's call. You probably heard about direct routing at Enterprise Connect, want to learn more. There's about 23% that are waiting for something else. So curious what you might be waiting for, because obviously there's always new features and functionality that Microsoft's working on, that Ribbon's working on, that might fill what you're looking to do. So feel free to either send us a note or throw it in the Q&A, and we can always take some of that stuff offline if something that you're looking to do is something that maybe is coming. We did share, of course, the roadmap, but in terms of wrapping this webinar up and going to the last bits of Q&A, if you didn't have time because maybe you're driving on your way to work, driving home from work, depending on where you happen to be, you might not have been able to do the poll questions. So if you do have questions and they weren't answered today, of course you can always send us questions at channelmarketing@rbbn.com. We'd be more than happy to answer your questions. They might be routed over to Microsoft. They might be done by us, but feel free to send us an email if your questions weren't answered today. If you need more questions or you want to have a bit of a deeper dive, you can, if you already have a representative, of course, feel free to work with your Ribbon account manager. If you don't have one, but you do want to hear more, of course, you can either go to our website and contact us, call us. And then finally, one last thing is if you enjoyed hearing what you heard today, but maybe want to hear more, Microsoft plans on doing a Teams on Air. And this, again, is featuring Nikolai. So you'll get to hear more from Nikolai. He'll talk about direct routing in more detail. That's happening in just a few days. It's on March 22nd. So please mark your calendar if you want to hear more about that. We'd be more than happy to get you more details on Teams on Air, on how you can access that and learn more about that. But with that, I want to thank you for joining today's webinar, learning a little bit more about how Ribbon can help you with direct routing, how Microsoft's Teams could be a great tool for collaboration within your environment, and how they've provided more choices and more options for you to be able to transit in and out of your enterprise to reach more people with direct routing.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brad, and thank you as well to Nikolai and to Dwight. Thank you for your questions. We've been able to answer just about almost all of them here on the chat window. And once again, we will have a recording of the webinar available, as well as the presentation within 24 hours from the completion of this webinar. Thank you again all for joining. Thank you for participating in our poll questions, and look for more from us regarding Microsoft Teams and our solutions. Please go to ribboncommunications.com for more information on our entire suite of solutions as well. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.